Thank you very much, Francisco. I'd just like to try to tie together a couple of thoughts that have been presented thus far. Francisco mentioned property rights and aggression, and Michelle mentioned sequestration. And of course, sequestration is absolutely essential if coal is to remain in the energy mix in this country. But sequestration raises the issue of property rights. Who owns those geologic formations in which all this stuff is going to be deposited? And aggression, what happens if it leaks back out or leaks into an adjacent geologic formation? So in any event, both very interesting and thoughtful presentations. And our next presenter is Jay Lehr from the Heartland Institute. I'll introduce him as saying, here is a man with an incredible amount of energy. If we could put it to very good use in this climate debacle, that would be great. Jay?
Thank you. My subject is green jobs, and it overlaps a little bit with what you've just heard, and I'm excited to talk about it. But I want to first ask you, how many of you heard Gabrielle Calzado yesterday afternoon? Raise your hand. Okay, just a few of you. Because I want to start off by reviewing there was a phenomenal session of two European Union folks, Roger Helmer, Benny Peiser, and then Gabrielle, talking about the disastrous experience they've had with renewable energy, green jobs, carbon sequestration, reducing CO2 in Europe. But Gabrielle's was particularly interesting because it's essentially bankrupted the Spanish economy, and we now want to follow in their place. They started off estimating an amount of money it would take to turn the country into renewable energy. A year later, they found out the cost was 3.5 times their first estimate, and 5 years later, it was 10 times their first estimate. They thought they would create a lot of jobs. It's now turned out that for every job they created, they've lost 2.2 jobs. In 2007, they lost 10,000 jobs. In 2008, they've lost 40,000 jobs. And the reason being is they subsidized wind by 90%, subsidized solar by 500%. It worked out that if you invested in any of these things, you would have a return of between 12% and 20%. And they were standing in line, to get these projects going. And eventually, all the jobs were in the production of the windmills and the solar systems. And when they couldn't produce anymore, they were out of jobs and out of money. It's just been a total disaster. So let's look at it in this country. Obama started out in his campaign to say that he was going to create 5 million green jobs. He's now down to 2.5 million green jobs. In fact, as Michelle pointed out, how do you define a green job? And I'll give it a shot. There are already 8 million green jobs in America by general definitions. But how do you define a green job? If you work in a smelter that puts out incredible carbon emissions and you're making the steel blades for windmills, is that a green job? If you then put the blades of the windmills on a truck and take them across country in a very fuel inefficient truck, is that trucker a green job? Well, the answer is we can define green jobs any way you want, and I have very little doubt that Obama will hit his target. I mean, he's going to make the rules as how you define a green job, so he'll do it. But along the way, we're going to lose some jobs. There are 1.6 million people employed in the oil and gas industry. Some of them are going to lose their jobs. We're going to kill efficient jobs in order to create inefficient jobs. I mean, there's no question about that because renewable energy, whether it's wind or solar or any biofuels, can never really be significant. We're already seeing hemorrhaging of jobs, of real jobs, in California and New York. I like to use Google as the best example. Everybody knows where Google is. It's in Silicon Valley. No, it's in, where is Google's headquarters? Name me Google's headquarters. Somewhere in California. Google has what we would call server farms. okay? I mean, to operate Google, man, they need a lot of servers. And those servers require a lot of electricity. Anyone know where their server farms are? North Carolina and Oregon, because energy costs are low. So California is already committing suicide. Have that bottle right there, boy. Now, Obama's doing one thing that he may get away with, and that is what is called an RPS, a renewable portfolio standard. He's trying to get through legislation that all providers of energy by some point in time will have to provide 25% of it in the renewable green area. That probably has a better chance of passing, because it's nebulous and vague at this point, than the tax and trade legislation that is being considered. What is driving the green jobs? Well, there's a huge green job lobby. There's a huge lobby for retraining people, and there is legislation to retrain. Going back to the Spain example, it took 20 pieces of legislation to force Spain into renewable energy. I mean, it just didn't happen by fiat. It didn't even happen just by offering the subsidies. They restricted so much activity in Spain, 20 separate pieces of legislation, in order to move the country toward renewable energy and green jobs, which has now, I think, officially bankrupted Spain. Well, we have various lobbies of people that are going to benefit with green jobs, and one of them is the retraining of people. And if you would go back historically through government, and Michelle, my guest, would know this, there has never been a job training program in the federal government that worked. Never. I mean, they've always never met their goals, but what they do is they're full employment programs for social workers, manpower types, job consultants, but they never ultimately work. Thomas Friedman, the New York Times writer, who I liken to be the journalist equivalent of James Hansen. He's that much of a nut. Most everything he writes, I think, is lunacy, though he wins awards. One of his latest books, Hot, Flat, and Crowded, and people worship him. I don't quite understand it. He just feels that renewable jobs, green energy, green jobs are going to save the planet. With no data to support that, and I liken Thomas Friedman to James Hansen in the following way. Both of them are so excited about the fact that there are so many people that hang on every word that comes out of their mouths. They have such a following. They've become such egotists. It's kind of like a rock star on drugs. They keep saying things that will attract attention, writing new books, putting out new press releases to gather attention, when in fact they make no sense. Well, here's what green jobs are really all about, and I'm going to tell you a story that I would guess 70% of the people in this room know, but maybe you don't know the whole history. So I'm going to go back to 1850 to the famous Austrian economist Frederick Bastiat. Frederick Bastiat wrote a very short essay, wrote it in French, translating the title into English. The title was That Which Is Seen, that which is unseen. And it's the parable of the little boy who threw a brick through a shopkeeper's window. And it tells the story that the bystanders at first thought, really terrible, this boy is a hoodlum throwing a brick through the window. And then some Keynesian-type economists came along and said, well, that's really not so bad. That makes work for the glazer, who then comes and repairs the window, and he gets 6 francs for the repair, and then he spends that 6 francs in the economy, and that's good for the economy. Work was made. So that's what was seen. What was not seen is that the shopkeeper who had to spend the 6 francs needed new shoes and wanted to buy some bread for his family. And so in that particular case, the shoemaker lost out and the baker lost out. Now, the glazer spent the money elsewhere, but the net loss is the pain of glass. So the asset of the community was reduced by breaking the window. It was just a transfer of wealth from the shopkeeper to the glazer. And this parable of the broken window, and it really is, to me, the support of Keynesian economy. The more money you spend, no matter how you spend it or who you take it from, supports an improved economy. It isn't true. So my supposition, and this is a very short paper, is that Mr. Obama is throwing a brick through the window of this entire nation's economy, and that we need to be talking about it. I'm going to close with some comments that I'm going to make at lunch as well. I have the honor of introducing all the luncheon speakers, and I'll grab the microphone for about a minute and a half to pose 5 takeaways to the whole audience, but I'm going to do it for you now because it relates very much to the previous talk about carbon sequestration and your comments as well. The 5 takeaways that I want to see everybody to carry home from this meeting, and I'll give you an acronym to remember them after I say them, is that we cleanse from our vocabulary the idea of calling ourselves climate skeptics. I was introduced, and you'll hear me say this again, lunch yesterday, on a radio show out of Detroit by a fellow by the name of Frank Beckman. And he spent 2 minutes describing this conference and introducing me as the next guest on his show. And he described this conference as a conference of climate realists. Never once did he use the word skeptic. So one takeaway is, let's change our name. How long did it take the left, our opponents, to change from global warming to climate change? They realized global warming was a problem in the middle of a tough winter, so they changed everything to climate change. I think we can that rapidly change what we are from climate skeptics to climate realists. The second same kind of idea is that when we talk about the cap and trade legislation that you've heard about, we stop calling it cap and trade and call it tax and trade. It is tax and trade. Obama admits that he's going to collect $650 billion in the next 10 years on selling these credits. And where's the money coming from? Believe me, the companies that buy the credits aren't going really ultimately to pay it. It's the consumers that buy the products. They pass the cost down the line and charge and pay their employees less money. So it's a tax and trade bill. The third point is just repeating what Art Robinson said. The issue is really one of life and death. You cannot overemphasize the importance of this battle because it is going to kill people in the third world and reduce our standard of living in this country. The fourth point is a C for the fact that our audience is, that we got to be talking to our consumers. I mean, it's great that we're talking to each other here. Most everybody at this conference, 800 of us, are involved in some way or another with the actual technical subject of climate change. We need to recognize that we have to get outside our groups, simplify our message, and talk to the consumer. And my final point is that in my opinion, and we need sound bites, and I think that it will stand up as the years go by, if we captured 100% of man's production of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, I think the temperature change 100 years from now would be insignificant. And therefore, every nickel we spend creating green jobs, sequestering carbon, reducing emissions, which is going to have a dramatically negative impact on the world economy and the world's quality of life, is absolutely, totally wasted in terms of the wellness of the Earth's population. It is not wasted on many constituencies that will benefit. I mean, our problem is there's so many constituencies with a horse in this race that will benefit by global warming. That's what we're up against. But it isn't the consumer, and that's our target. So the 5 messages I gave you are RTLCC. So if you will remember, R stands for our, and it stands for realist instead of skeptic. TLC, you all know, is tender, love, and care, but in this case, it's tax, life, and consumer, and the final C is carbon capture. Use it for capture. So those are kind of 5 takeaways. If we all did more, I think this conference will have had a significant impact. Thank you.